It is now just about 5 minutes after 8 o'clock, and we do know that we are living in unprecedented times of COVID-19, where we have to navigate and literally not know how this is going to play out. But we have communities and organizations that are ensuring that public awareness is done and that they're doing something about it. And one of those organizations is what is known as Uhuru Community Project. And this morning we're joined by the Chief Executive Officer, Davis Okombo, who is joining us from Kisumu. Good morning, Davis, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Gitonga. It's a pleasure to be back at KTN and talk about COVID-19 and its effect.
Fantastic. Maybe for the benefit of those who may not know what Uhuru Community Project is all about, give us an overview of what Uhuru Community Project is.
Uhuru Community Development Project is a non-profit organization that is privileged to work towards uplifting the welfare of children and other vulnerable groups. And we do this through a number of strategies that include policy advocacy. We work with the Senate and the National Assembly to lobby for the enactment of child-friendly policies and, and legislation. Apart from that, we work at the international level. We are a member of COVID-19 Coordination Hub that brings together 120 organizations from across the world, and we've been able to develop guiding principles of COVID-19 that we share with the rest of the countries.
Sir, what would you say so far have been achievements of Uhuru Development Community? What achievements do you have so far?
Well, in a nutshell, we have been able to contribute to the COVID-19 rules that were prescribed by the Cabinet Secretary for Health. Apart from that, we have been engaged in a feeding program for the vulnerable communities here in Kisumu, and in particular Manyata, where we provide food and non-food support to a total of 600 families every week.
All right, and how do you go about your funding? How do you go about getting resources? Because this, of course, is an organization, I imagine, that requires a lot of funds to get your work done.
We have a team of dedicated partners, particularly in Germany, who support the various activities that we do, and we owe them a great attitude for the kind of work that we're doing and the partnership that we've been able to develop over a long time.
All right, and I'm sure there are some who probably, just for the benefit of those who may imagine it involves Uhuru as the president, maybe just to give us that clarity now that it's called Uhuru Community Development Project. I'm sure you get that question a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gitonga. Well, personally, I'm a great supporter of President Uhuru Kenyatta, but the organization is non-political, and we are not in any way associated with any political wing. I need to clarify that Uhuru, of course, is a Swahili word for freedom, and it was founded to give freedom from abuse and violation of rights against children and women, and therefore we are not in any way associated with any political grouping.
All right. Now, what are your thoughts so far and feelings of how the government has handled COVID-19 so far? We've seen different countries do different things in different ways. For example, there are those who've gone for a total lockdown where there is absolutely no movement, only to buy essential goods. Kenya has taken a different, perspective and has opened, or rather kept some essential businesses running for the sake of the economy. Your comments on how Kenya's model of dealing with COVID-19 is so far, and how effective it is?
Well, I would like to mention that the response of our government to mitigate against COVID-19 so far has been effective. And in particular, the containment measures such as the national curfew that has been imposed, the restriction of movement, has been able to flatten the curve of infections. Remember, a few weeks ago, the CS for Cabinet had projected thousands of infections that would have occurred. But I think because of the containment measures, there has been a decline in the rates of infection. I would also wish to state that in Wuhan, in China, where it is believed that the virus originated, they had very, very strict lockdown measures that really shut down businesses, schools, and public transportation, and so on. And in China, they went to the extent of even using facial recognition techniques that would be able to detect those people who violated quarantine measures and other measures that the government had put in place. Therefore, I would wish to state that the measures that have been put in place may bear fruit in the long run.
What about the question of enforcement? There are those who say that this is more of a health issue as opposed to a law issue. And we've seen, for instance, now people may be arrested if you're not wearing a mask. What are your thoughts on how the government would balance that scale? Because obviously, if you let people be, chances are they may not wear masks. Excuse me. But when we try and enforce or make it a legal issue as opposed to a health issue, then we're likely to get it wrong.
I think, Mr. Gitonga, we have to refer to those legal instruments that give powers to the law enforcement agencies to enforce the lockdown measures. And in particular, the curfew has originated from the Public Order Act, which has also prescribed the penalties for violation. So what I have to state clearly here is that it is important that those measures that are being enforced must in the first instance be legal, because if they are decisions and actions that are ultra vires, then the court may be pleased to deem them as void ab initio, and we don't want that conflict between the executive and also the judiciary. Secondly, I have to state that experience from other jurisdictions, from China, Germany, and the rest of the world, the containment measures are being enforced by the law enforcement agencies. But I would like to take this opportunity, Mr. Gitonga, to make a special appeal to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior to ensure that the Kenya police that have been entrusted with the issue of law enforcement, I would really wish to appeal to him to give an order that they follow the due process of law. We have instances, Mr. Gitonga, where the police would arrest people who violate certain measures, and instead of bringing them through the due process of law, they actually use that to solicit for bribes. And this has stigmatized the fight against COVID-19. So I think if we stick to the directives that the CS for Health and also our president has given, without bringing in the malpractice by the police, then we are going to be on the right course.
All right. I think it would also be prudent for you maybe to speak to Kenyans in general, because the government has a responsibility. But like the Minister of Health, Mutahi Kagwe, has said time and again, this has got to be a collective exercise. We have to, as Kenyans, also do our bit. What would you say to the general public?
Mr. Gitonga, one, yesterday the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics made it very clear that up to 94.1% of Kenyan population are aware of COVID-19. Now, I would wish to make a special appeal to the public to follow those guidelines that the Ministry of Health has prescribed. This is because for COVID-19, there are certain risk factors that we need to be aware about. One is age, and second is what we call comorbidities. Now, with age, medical research shows that when people begin to advance in age, there is a process which is called immunosenescence, which means that the immune system gets weaker. And also with the old age, research shows that older people have a higher level of what we call angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is the receptor cell for coronavirus. And secondly, for those people with comorbidities or pre-existing conditions, they are more vulnerable. And therefore, we need to be very clear that we have to protect this particular group, that we need to follow those rules and regulations so that together we can have a country even after COVID-19.
All right, and maybe moving away from that, and thank you for that advice. Question now in regards to COVID-19 on the effect of the economy. Of course, we know it's taken a hard hit, and from your organization point of view, and now that you are one organization that is looking at this keenly, what are some of the predictions that you have in regards to the effect that COVID-19 is going to have to the economy?
I think, number one, I would wish to appreciate those measures that the President put forward as far as the fiscal policy is concerned. As you can remember, there has been a tax reduction, in particular corporation and individual income tax, that has been reduced from 30% to 25%. And also the turnover tax that has been reduced from 3% to 1%. And furthermore, the value-added tax has been reduced from 16 to 14%. However, there are a lot of effects, even of the reduction of the taxes on the economy. For example, this economy stimulus packages have reduced the projected revenue for Kenya by up to 0.38% of GDP. Now, that means that there is going to be a widening of fiscal deficit, and this will increase the level of public debt. Apart from its effect at the national level, there is a big impact on the livelihoods, especially of the poor people. One, the levels of inequality are going to rise in Kenya. The gap between the rich and the poor will continue to widen. Many people have lost their employments and sources of livelihoods. Even if you look at the school system, now we face the closure of schools and universities. This is going to have a greater impact even on the social development of the country. Having said that, I'd wish to develop a scenario of how Kenya is likely to be. Now, one, if the people of Kenya can follow those regulations that the Ministry of Health has put forward, then there is likely to be a flattening of the curve, and then the economy can pick up again. But if we don't follow the said regulations, then it is likely that there is going to be a spike in infection rates, which will have effect even at household levels. When people become sick and people lose their lives, then we are going to have a bleak future. And that's why, in a nutshell, I once again appeal to the people of Kenya. Please let us observe those regulations that the Ministry of Health has prescribed.
All right. Are there things that you possibly would think we could have done differently, particularly to keep our economy still afloat? Because if we take examples of, say, the US, where they've gone for total lockdowns, or South Africa, for example, our economy may not be able to sustain that. Are there things that maybe you think we could have done differently to ensure that we stay afloat?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gitonga. Now, one, we have to understand that a lot of developed economies, like in Sweden and the EU, they have better welfare system. If somebody loses a job, for example, then the state is able to provide welfare support to them. And therefore, the social protection flaws in some of these countries are well developed. This is unlike Kenya, where social protection flaws are not well developed. So back to your question, what could have been done
differently?
Differently. I think, number one, we should try to ease the lockdown, but taking very careful precautions. The practices of social distancing, the practice of wearing face masks should continue as we ease the lockdown. Secondly, I have to say that what has been done in Kenya compared to other jurisdictions like Uganda that began with lockdown early enough, and Rwanda and so on, I think Kenya has been very lenient, and we should not abuse this leniency. Therefore, I think what we need to look at is the way forward after lockdown.
Right.
What can we do so that we keep our country safe?
All right, and as we wind up, maybe just your thoughts on post-COVID. There are many things that, of course, we're having to change now, and some of them may not go back. Like you've mentioned, social distancing may be something, even if the lockdown ended, we would have to maintain and continue with, and may even change how we do some things culturally, weddings, gatherings, funerals, things like that. Your advice to Kenyans to not imagine that this is something that may just end now, and post-COVID, we just go back to where we were before.
Well, we have to remember that the World Health Organization has so far declared COVID-19 as endemic, and that implies that COVID-19 is here to stay with us in the community. There is a lot of studies that is going on, and recently during the World Health Assembly, the European Union made a resolution that was not opposed by the ministers, and it calls for fair and independent investigations to determine the etiology of COVID-19. Now, if that is done, then there are a lot of lessons that we are going to learn, because there is still a lot that is not known. Now, I wish to remind my fellow Kenyans that the containment measures may be here for a while. Those measures that the WHO has prescribed, in particular social distancing, washing of hands with soap or sanitizers, and also seeking medical care and so on, are going to stay with us for a while. Therefore, it's my special appeal that we follow those measures that the Ministry of Health from time to time will continue to prescribe in order to flatten the curve of COVID-19 in Kenya.
All right, thank you very much, Davis Okombo, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Uhuru Community Development Project, for joining us this morning. In 30 seconds, your closing remarks, sir, Mr. Okombo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gitonga. In a nutshell, I really appeal to fellow Kenyans, please let us observe the Ministry of Health regulations, let us pray for our country, and let us remain optimistic that at the end of the day, we are going to remain a resilient country, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, sir. That's Davis Okombo, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Uhuru Community Development Project, joining us this morning. For now, we're going to take a short break right here on Morning Express. Do stay with us. We have stories that are making headlines coming up on the other side of the break.